Hi class, let's talk about public speaking and the foundations of public speaking. We're going to get right into the PowerPoint. That's basically what we're going to talk about as kind of giving an idea of where does public speaking as we teach it in this college, what are the foundations for it? Where does it come from? And then kind of give you an overview of speech making and the speaker. And it's going to give you a little bit of that, and we're going to talk about that right now. So I'm going to move right into find my screen. There we go. And so here we are, Introduction to Public Speaking. And so if you remember when you were in either high school or junior high, you learned about Western civilization, and you probably learned about the classical Greeks, and you probably have a good understanding of the Greeks. Basically, the Greeks and the Romans, but really the Greeks, they presented the idea of democracy and what a democracy is, and how to work a government, and in terms of how to lead in a government. And they are what we think of as like the fathers of philosophy, and a lot of our values and our ethics and our ways of behaving in society actually come from uh, the classical Greek time, classical Greek period, and the Romans built upon that. And today we're going to talk about a particular Greek philosopher, and then we're going to talk about a Roman statesman. And both of those people have contributed to what we understand, how we approach public speaking today. So what's kind of interesting is this word rhetoric is kind of thrown around all the time, right? Like, well, it's his rhetoric. Well, what does that really mean? Well, rhetoric in its essence and its definition means the practice of giving speeches. And so when we study rhetoric, that's part of what we're studying. A lot of times when we talk about rhetorical analysis, we are looking at the way we do analysis of speeches, or particularly how people are speaking. So let's get right into it. So Aristotle, we're going to look at Aristotle first. You've probably heard of Aristotle before, right? So Aristotle is this guy who was a philosopher. He studied under Plato, and you probably remember people like Socrates. Those names ring bells, right? Socratic method. Let's see, what else did Socrates? Hippocratic oath, Hippocrates. He's another philosopher of that time. So Aristotle, he was basically a philosopher and a man known for, he had a high ranking in that society, and he studied how people gave speeches. And in those days, when they gave speeches, they had to deliver. There were orators at that time. It was also like that in the Roman time, but they were orators, and the way they made policy, or the way they moved things along, is they talked about it, and they gave speeches. Like, someone would give a speech and there'd be people listening, and then someone would give another speech, and that's the way they communicated. So he studied, like, he decided what is a good speech, like what makes a good speaker and what makes a good speech. And he said we need to have these three components, what is also known as inartistic proofs, or Aristotelian rhetorical appeals. Okay, Aristotelian, which is Aristotle, Aristotelian rhetorical appeals. And he said we need ethos, pathos, and logos. So ethos, it doesn't mean ethics, okay? But in the back of your mind, you can keep that. Ethics really refers to a speaker's credibility and the credibility of his speech. Now, I want you to think about all the ways that a person establishes their credibility when they do it. Like, think of when you did your self-introduction speech, or when I did my self-introduction speech. I talked about my background, right? Like, I studied my undergraduate degrees in communication. Then I got a master's degree in communication. That's me establishing my credibility. And then I think I also told you that I've been teaching public speaking for quite a few years, actually 8 years now. And so that establishes my credibility. I have experience and I have credentials in teaching this particular subject and teaching communication courses. That's the way you establish your credibility as a person. And how you establish it in the speech is credibility. Now we can move into like bringing that word ethics in there. Is how we approach our audience. Are we respectful? Do we seem trustworthy? And how do you determine that in a speaker, right? Think about politicians. How do we determine someone feels trustworthy? Well, we are able to fact check what they say. Are they telling us the truth? We're going to have a whole lecture on ethics in public speaking. But one of those things about we need to feel like when a speaker is talking that we can trust that speaker's words, right? That we can trust what they're saying. Even if they're trying to be persuasive, but at least they're using facts. So it's about trust. It's about your credibility. And how does that get established? So that's going to get established by your experience, and you're stating your experience in your speech and your background. Obviously, if you have a reputation going into being a speaker, then we know you already have that credibility, right? We're more likely to listen to a doctor. Think about COVID-19 right now. There's a whole bunch of misinformation going out there. A lot of conspiracy theory type things, right? And are you more likely to listen to someone who has a conspiracy theory about COVID-19? Are you more likely to listen to someone who's a scientist or a doctor who's been studying diseases like this, like influenza? I've been studying it for years. I don't know about you, but I'm more likely to believe the doctor who's been studying influenza and how it's contagious. So that's again ethos. Okay, I'm not going to belabor that anymore. Let's go straight into pathos. Pathos. So Aristotle said a speaker has to have pathos. Pathos has to be evident in their speech. Pathos is your appeal to emotions. Okay, speakers appeal to emotions. How does the speaker do that? Does it in their tone, right? If they're excited, oh my God, I'm so excited. That's appealing to your emotions, right? It's getting you excited. My voice, as soon as I bring it up, you're getting like, it's getting more exciting. Or if I'm really like somber and I'm talking in my delivery, that could be if I was talking about death or the death of my father, and I talked about it in this way, that somber tone would match, right? Would match what would appeal to your emotions, your own feeling about death. So that's how we do it in delivery. It's also the words we use, right, to appeal to someone's emotions. Certain words that we use, like scary or tired or beautiful or sunny or blissful, right? All those words make us feel something, right? That's my cat. She probably makes me feel something too. Okay, so that's in the words, but also how the speaker acts, right? Appeal to emotions is, can you feel the emotions coming from the speaker? Are they in it, right? Are they like totally in what they're saying? Are they, and that goes back to ethos, because there's bridges to all of these appeals that we're talking about, right? So am I, when I'm talking to you, believe me, because I am really in it. You can see it in my face and my expressions and how I feel, right? So is the speaker, is the words, that's pathos. Come on up here. Come on. My cat's going to come up here in a minute. She has to think about it for a minute. Okay. So that's ethos, pathos, logos. Now, oftentimes students want to go logos and they want to say it's logic. It's really not logic per se. Okay, it doesn't really translate to that. Come up here. What it means is the speaker give a clear, organized speech? Do they make sense? Do they use facts? Okay, things that, hang on a second, things that you might consider logical, right? But it's really, it has to do with how you organize it. Does it make sense? Does it have a flow? Can you follow along? Is it clear? So that's what we're looking in logos. Does the speaker speak clearly? Do they pronounce their words well? Or do they articulate their words well? Right? So there's a lot in that in logos. Okay, that should give you an idea. You're going to be using ethos, pathos, and logos for the first speech analysis that you do. So it's really important that you understand what these are. Ethos actually translates it's a Greek word, into character. Okay, so keep that in mind. It has to do with credibility. Pathos is your appeal to emotions, And logos is how organized, how much does it make sense? Is it clear? That's what we're talking about. Is it free of error, free of fallacies? We haven't even talked about fallacies. Let's go on to the next one. So the next guy is Cicero. He's the Roman statesman. So I told you I was going to talk about a Greek guy and a Roman guy. And notice that they're males in those days. The males had the privilege of creating knowledge. I'm sure women created knowledge, but it wasn't talked about. So in the way that this is talked about. So it's what I like to call my old white guys. Nothing against old white guys. Just more of a joke. So let's look at this. Roman philosopher, statesman. He looked at rhetoric, right, the practice of giving speeches, and said that the way we can understand, or what speech making needs to have, is they need to have what we call the classical canons of rhetoric. Okay, and in many ways you're going to see the classical canons. We're going to talk about that, and then we're going to take a break. The classical canons of rhetoric really refer to both, it gets even more into what a speech should have. Okay, they'll really match. When I start talking about the elements of a speech, you'll see the classical canons of rhetoric in there in terms of even how you approach a speech. So let's go on to that. Okay, so those are the classical canons of rhetoric: invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. And I'm actually going to go into a little detail about each one of those. So let's move on to that. So classical canons of rhetoric. The first one, invention. How do you adapt, choose your message, choose your topic? How do you adapt your message to fit your audience? Okay? How do you do that? What you're going to learn in this class is the audience drives a message. You don't just pick a topic and then force it on the audience. You have to think about, there's a topic, is your audience going to be receptive to that particular topic? Until my cat's having a good time here, isn't she? Arrangement. Choosing the most effective organization for your speech, right? That goes back to logos, right? You can make some connects. So notice the second one. First you choose the topic. How are you going to put that information together? You're going to learn that how you put that information together will be important to how you, depending on whether you're informing, persuading, or entertaining. There's a way that we arrange a speech that will make sense depending on what your goal is in that speech. So invention, arrangement, style. What kind of language do you use to express it? Also goes to your delivery, but there's a separate category for delivery. But it's like, what kind of language? Is it formal? If your audience are young people or the same age as you, do you use more slang? Right? Who's your audience? Who you're talking to? If you're talking to, let's say you're a computer science student and you're talking to computer engineers, you're going to use computer engineer language, but you're not going to use that language you were talking to a general GE class, right? Because we're not going to know what you're talking about if we're not computer science people. Okay. Memory. I don't want you to think that memory means that you're supposed to memorize your speeches. So just like drop that out of your head, take that out. If any part of you thought you're supposed to memorize your speech, you're not supposed to memorize your speech. We're going to turn this into modern way of thinking. In those days, they had to memorize speeches because they couldn't write it down. They did this. There's a whole way that you can memorize. It's like a conceptual way that you memorize, and we're not going to talk about that today, which is kind of an interesting way that they did memorize things. They would like place words or ideas in particular areas in their brain or match it up to something conceptual in order to help them memorize a speech. But your job is not to do that. Your job is going to be using what I call a delivery outline. And I say that in quotes, meaning it can be note cards or it can be a literal, like a piece of paper. But we're going to be working on extemporaneous speech. And that is to practice giving speeches with some help, okay? With an aid, like a delivery outline. So your job is to know your speech, to be really comfortable with your speech, to have practiced your speech, and that's the key. Just change memory into how are you going to practice your speech and you'll practice it over and over and over again. The more you practice it, the more you get to know it. And the more then you can adjust your speech and see like, okay, I did well here, but I need to kind of work on this part. So that's what memory is. Delivery is, how are you using your being, right? How do you use your, not just your verbal voice to show, expression or your face or anything like that, right? You've got your whole being to use. You want to use that because that's what's interesting. Remember, you have an audience. This isn't just about you. You're using this instrument and your voice to get our attention. How are you going to do that? Right? How are you going to do that? So by the end of the semester, y'all are going to be really good at this. Okay, but jump in, see what it's like. Classical canons of rhetoric, invention, arrangement, style, memory, delivery. That's Cicero. And Aristotle gave us ethos, pathos, and logos. We're going to take a break.